We often go through times where people just don't agree with us and often can come against us, and it affects the way we do things. Well, today on Daily Renewal, I'm going to talk about how to succeed when people oppose you. Well, this week I've had a few conversations with people about some of the effects that social media has on people. In particular, there was a couple stories in the news this week about sports stars who have really been affected by social media. You know, some of the coaches have told the players, stay off social media because they were biting into some of the things people were saying to the point where it was bringing them down and affecting the way that they played. Now, if you're anything like me, you've had times where people have either not agreed with you or maybe said nasty things about you. And in today's culture, social media is often one of the platforms used to speak against people. And if you're not careful, these things can affect you negatively. And so today, we're going to talk about how to deal with these situations when people try to oppose you. I'm Pastor Lyle, and welcome to Daily Renewal. If this is your first time tuning in with us, I just want to ask you to consider becoming a subscriber to our channel. If you are getting benefit from our content, please like and share this video with anybody that you think that it will help. In the old days, we'll say, in my younger days, when I played hockey, it used to be a totally different standard on what was acceptable. If you tune in regularly, you know that I used to play fairly competitive hockey, and I was a goalie in hockey. And in those days, they would allow the fans to do things in the crowd that they definitely don't even come close to allowing today. We often joke, we can make light of the fact that, somebody just talking bad about you on Twitter or something, it affects these young people today. Back in it, I've used it as an old-timer type story. I don't feel that old, but back in the days when I played hockey, people didn't just yell at you. And in fact, as a goalie, when they scored on us as goalies back in the 80s when I played, entire fan groups, like, I'm 16 to 18, 19-year-old kid, and you've got grown men, groups of them that would yell at you repeatedly and say things that were just so derogatory. And back in those days, nobody thought that was a big deal. In fact, they used to throw things at us. I remember games I played where they threw pennies, and I remember people throwing pop cans at me and stuff. Just a young kid. Nobody thought about the mental damage that would do. But I will say, in my day, one of the things that one of the coaches that I had warned me about, and warned all of us as players about, he said, don't pay any attention to the newspapers. He says, when you play a great game, they're going to make you sound way better than you actually were. And when you play a bad game, they're going to make you sound way worse than you actually are. And it can play tricks on your mind. And so it's with that mindset today, when I look at some of the things that go on with pro athletes, it's no surprise to me, even though they may be professionals, we can be very affected by the things that people say, whether verbally or, as I mentioned, on some of these social platforms. It can happen to sports stars, but it also is very common with a lot of us. There's things that people say that if we're not careful, if we don't know how to deal with these things properly, they can have a major effect negatively on our lives. And so I really felt like I wanted to deal with that today. Well, I want to take a look today in the Bible. We're going to look at Apostle Paul's life again. And, Apostle Paul was a character that went through a lot of things. He had a lot of highs and a lot of lows. He had a lot of people that liked him, and he had a lot of people that didn't like him. But as it turns out, he was responsible for writing most of the letters in the New Testament. And there was a time in his ministry where he was actually facing heavy persecution to the point where he was actually in prison. And we pick up the story today. He's writing his letter to the church in Philippi. And the church in Philippi, they were a church that was always very encouraging to him. There was times where he either needed finances or whenever he had a need, these guys were the ones that by every indication were the ones who were always encouraging to him. They looked to him as being a mentor and almost like a father-son relationship. And so Paul finds himself in the position where he's in prison. And the first thing he decides to do is he says is write these people a letter, and it's to encourage them. Now remember, he's in a situation where he should be discouraged. He didn't know whether he was going to live through this. And as we go through some of our tough things in life, he places he shows us that he is a great example, or the Lord uses him as a great example to show us how some of these people that went on before us, they were able to sustain some of these pressures that are similar to some of the pressures we face today. And he shows these people and us that not only can we get through these things when we stay close to the Lord, but we will get through these things if we put together some of these principles that God used him to show us. So we see he's in prison, and he's writing to these people. And I'm going to take up the story in Philippians chapter 1, starting in verse 12. He says this. He says, "But I want you to know, brethren, that the things which happened to me have actually turned out for the furtherance of the gospel, so that it has become evident to the whole palace guard and to all the rest that my chains are in Christ. And most of the brethren in the Lord, having become confident by my chains, are much more bold to speak the word without fear." Now, I'm going to stop right there. The first key principle that I want to show you today that Paul was able to understand is that when we've got people coming against us, whether it's physically, here he's in a physical prison, there's always something good that God is trying to show us or do with us. And we have to take the time to spend with him so that he would reveal some of the positive things that are going on in our lives. I can tell you that as I've gone through some of the toughest situations that I've gone through in my life, when I've learned to embrace the fact that I not only know that God knows what's going on, but God also knows how to deliver me through these things, it's always been something that has helped sustain me through tough situations. I think back to a story in Genesis, for example, the story of Joseph, a great story. Joseph starts out as a young man that his brothers are jealous of him. And you can see this particular part of the story is in Genesis 50. And what happens is through this story, Joseph is put in a pit by his brothers because they're jealous of him and left there to die. And it ends up, he doesn't die. But years later, he ends up becoming a guy who's in charge of a lot of the financial things in Egypt. Well, the Egypt, or the whole nation, or the whole area, comes on rough times, and these brothers of his find themselves in the place where they have to go to Egypt and humble themselves just so they can buy food and everything. Well, it turns out that Joseph arranges these things, so he stands before his brothers and reveals himself, and the first thing the brothers do is they have deep regret. Number one, because they don't, some of them were at the place where they regretted doing what they did, but also a lot of it was they regretted because they didn't know how Joseph was going to repay them. Was he going to bring retribution? And, one particular scripture that stands out that exemplifies how this whole story ends, we see in Genesis 50, and verse 20, Joseph sums up by telling his brothers how he viewed the situation. And this is what he said. He says, "But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people alive." And he said, "Now therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones." And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Through this whole situation, there's no doubt that there was an attempt to destroy Joseph. And, there's so many stories out throughout the Bible where we have an enemy, the devil, who tries to destroy us. But understand this, that as much as we have an enemy who tries to destroy us, Joseph was able to see that not only was the enemy not successful, but God was able to use that situation to not just sustain him, but to deliver the nation, or to deliver his entire family. And for us to be able to pick out the positive things in situations that are tough are very important. But I also refer in the New Testament to a scripture in Romans 8:28. Talks about how all things work toward good for those who love God and are the called according to his purpose. And if you love God today, then it doesn't matter what negative situation has happened in your life. And we've all had negative situations. You might be saying, well, Pastor Lyle, what about some of these things that happen to people that just they're beyond understanding. Women that have gone through some things, like rape or these kind of things. How could God ever use that? I mean, you can't tell me. Was God there during that whole thing? As tough as you can pick the toughest situations that we go through in life, and as much as we might not understand them at the time. I've come to learn through, as I mentioned earlier, some of the tough situations that I've gone through in life, they made no sense to me. And I thought, God, where were you in this? When you come to the place where you understand that, yes, the enemy has done things to try and destroy you, but God can even take those things, something as bad as what I had just mentioned. And when he delivers you, when he helps show you, just how much he loves you and brings healing to those areas, then you can minister to other people that are going through those very things that you've gone through, in such a way where they can maybe experience the love of God in a dimension maybe they've never even imagined before. Again, all the things that have ever happened to us, God can take those things and bear fruit through them, or bring situations where you can help other people. So I want you to keep that in mind. So when we look at Paul here, as much as he's in prison, he doesn't know whether he's going to live. He makes a decision, first of all, to write a letter of encouragement, because these people that in Philippi, they would have been wondering, how, here's our mentor. How's he going to handle this? And Paul wanted them to know, hey, as bad as this looks, I'm okay. In fact, I'm more than okay. I'm flourishing. Look at the great things that are happening. He's talking about the most important thing to Paul, next to his own personal walk with Jesus, was the furtherance of the gospel message, the good news of how Jesus came, for anyone that would call upon his name. This very message, I want to let you know that it's still working, even though it looks terrible. I'm going to tell you that we can make it, because I can make it. Now you can have the confidence to know that this gospel that I preach and that you preach is having the right effect. And so he says this. He talks about the people guarding him. A lot of these men would have been unsaved people. And he says, as a result of these chains, I'm able to reach some of these people that I wouldn't have been able to reach before. And I'm seeing success. And then he says also, this is the things that are happening to me. It's bringing a boldness to some of the people that are believers. Friend, how we handle the tough situations in our lives, it can have a direct result in people that don't know Jesus, to see that there's something different about us when we do rely upon Jesus. He's able to sustain us. He's able to give us access to his grace. The power of God that enables us to do what we cannot do in our own strength. This doesn't even sound like it's humanly possible to act the way that Paul's acting here. And I'm going to tell you that it probably isn't humanly possible. But with God, he makes these kind of situations possible to go through. And that's what Paul is saying. He says, unsaved people are going to see how I go through this, and it'll be a testimony. That'll show people the power of God. And also, those other believers, they're being strengthened because God is helping me take a stand. So friend, when we go through some of these situations, it's very important that we take the time. And sometimes you might think, well, what can I take good out of this situation? There's always something good that God is going to use these situations for. We just have to take the time to say, Lord, show me what I can see out of here. What's the benefit of me going through this? And if it is just making sure that you stand firm, through a trial, you're going to see that it'll make a difference, not only in your life, but also in the people's lives that are around you. We have to remember that we are being watched, and God empowers us to go through anything in life, any trial in life. So that's the first point. The second thing that I want to point out to you here, we're going to talk about, there's a group of people here that are even looked at as maybe even being respected, that aren't really, their motives aren't right. They're actually trying to do Paul harm in some ways. And there's often times where I look at myself as a pastor. I haven't always had my views line up with a lot of other pastors. That's going to happen. There's a lot of different types of churches, and a lot of little different beliefs within the Christianity. But that being the case, I've come to learn that often the motives of people are the problems. And, I'll just show you what happens here. Starting in verse 15, Paul talks about some of these people that are preaching Christ that have poor motives. And he says, this is how he deals with it. He says, some indeed preach Christ even from envy and strife, and some also from goodwill. The former preach Christ from selfish ambition, not sincerity, supposing to add affliction to my chains. But the latter, out of love, knowing that I am appointed for the defense of the gospel. So he talks about there's some guys that are preaching, and in some ways they're using the situation even with me to they're preaching stuff that is potentially, their motive is even try to hurt me. There was like a competitiveness. None of that ever happens today in church. Of course, I say that tongue in cheek. And then he goes on to say, what then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is preached, and in this I rejoice, yes, and will rejoice. Now, I want to just clarify something here. Paul talks a lot in a lot of his letters about false teachers, false prophets. And in the last days, we're going to see even more of these things. And what I believe Paul is saying here is he's not talking about false teachers, false church movements, and all that. He's actually talking about people that are preaching in such a way that they're not very far off in their preaching. However, what is off is their motives. And friend, I know a lot of preachers, and I can even say for myself, I'm human. There's been times over the years where I believe I preached the word properly, but there may have been times where my motives weren't always 100% pure. That doesn't make me a false teacher or anything, but sometimes the human side gets in, or what's often referred to as the flesh. We're appealing to the flesh more than we should. And so Paul here isn't talking about false teachers. He's talking about that there's people often that may have selfish motives for some of the things that they preach. Even though the preaching might be right, the motives may not be. And Paul is saying here is, what? I understand that there's people that have times where their motives aren't right for what they're doing. But you know what? I'm okay with that. I get that. I'm just happy, and as he puts it here, he says, I'm just happy that Christ is being preached. Because Paul's whole focus was preaching the gospel. And friend, you know what? You're not going to agree with everybody 100% probably doctrinally. We're all in this process of learning about Jesus, and there's different areas where where you might be weak in. But as long as we're all submitting ourselves to the Lord and asking Him to reveal truth, we'll continue to progress, and even our some of the parts of our belief system personally will be refined and will be more like Jesus. But that being the case, Paul saw it really importantly that as much as there was people that might have been criticizing him, he didn't let that affect him. And one of the things that we go through often is there might be times where you have people that you even respect that say things about you, and again, if you're not careful, you can respect them so much that you start to doubt even where you're at. And what do I mean by that? I've had times in my life where, specifically, I had a couple times in my life, or a time period of my life where there was lots of things being said about me, and my wife and I joke about this because there was a time where there was a lot of rumors going out. I've been in ministry a long time, and I've been at a couple different churches, and for the most part, if the Lord led me to different places, it went well. There was one situation where it did not go well at all. And there was a lot of different rumors and things going around. And I knew in my own heart, I'm somebody who you spend time with the Lord. And the way I treat criticism, I had a mentor years ago. He says, Lyle, whenever somebody criticizes you, even if you think that they are way off base, you should be willing to get by yourself and bring that criticism before the Lord and say, Lord, as much as I maybe don't think there's any truth to this, if there is even a speck of truth to what people are saying, please reveal it to me, show me, and help me to let you into that area of my life so that I could have that area fixed, so that you could heal that area and make this so that it's not a weak area in my life anymore. And that's something I've come to live by. If there's people that have criticized, and there's been many people, all of us go through criticism, getting before the Lord and just saying, hey, if there's truth to this, I want to know. Because if you're not willing to do that, then you're probably not willing to allow God to bring healing in that area. And your growth in that area will be stunted until you choose to deal with it. Well, so having said that, that's the way I try to approach things. And I was in this time period where there was a lot of negative things being said about me, and I had a lot of positive things being said by other people. But it got to the point where, I even joked with my wife and I says, if I didn't know better, if I'd heard all these things about this particular person, I said, if I'd heard these things, if I didn't know it was me, I'd actually probably not like this guy. So I was in this point where I'm just kind of going, okay, I even began to doubt myself and go, maybe there's some truth to some of these things that people are saying. Well, I tell you that story to tell you this. Then really, more importantly, when you've got people saying things, and often it can be even people that you respect, don't let the negative press get you down. Don't listen to it. As I mentioned earlier, I had a hockey coach, and he said, don't read the newspaper. You're going to get a really warped view of who you are. And it can play an effect on how you function. You start believing some of the things. Either you believe things that you think you're way better than you are, or you believe things thinking you're way worse than you are. If we're going to get through some of these times, you need to know what God says you are, what He thinks about you. Do your best to go through some of these criticisms, and maybe it is a time where you need to stay away from social media. You need to stay away from some of the negatives and the positives. When I go through times like this, it's those times where you need to dig in and maybe spend a little bit more time with the Lord than usual. Spend a little bit more time in prayer. Spend a little bit more time reading your Bible, whatever it takes. But the more time you spend with Him, you're going to find out what He thinks about you. And that is one of the key things in Christianity that people need to understand. Often we look for our validation through people. And we can get it to a degree. Might be fairly accurate to a degree, but if you're going to get a real accurate picture, then you need to know what God says. And the way that that's developed is by spending time with Him. So I encourage you to do that today. And I'm going to end the last point that I really wanted to focus on that Paul looks at. Again, here he is. He's in this position where he encourages himself with looking at the positive things that are going on, even around a bunch of negativity. He doesn't bite into what people are saying. And the last one is he focuses on what he's really on the planet for. And that is the focus on the gospel. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. A lot of us, we look at preachers as being the ones that need to be focused on the gospel. But, friend, whether you realize it or not, every one of us is here to fulfill something that God's called us all to do. And that is be a witness for the gospel, for the sake of the gospel. We talk about preachers. We're all here to preach the gospel. But if I was to just say preach the gospel, some of you might think, well, I'm not a preacher. Whether you like to know it or like to admit it or not, all of us are preachers. Some of us use more words than others. But I guess I want to restate that all of us are here to bring the gospel message to other people. to do the work of an evangelist. Now, the work of an evangelist is to bring the good news of what Jesus did on the cross to everyone. This good news is something that the Lord desires for everybody to experience. You cannot be reconciled to God unless you first have the gospel preached to you, why Jesus came and the effect that what he did on the cross has on anybody that would call upon his name. We need to understand that people, first of all, need to know that. And for them to know that, it comes through us. There's people that I'm not going to be able to reach that you are. We all have spheres of influence. And for every one of us, God has put you in that place. I hear lots of people saying, oh, I want to know what my ministry is. Especially if you start going to church for a while, there's this focus on ministry. And, we often forsake the main two ministries that God's called us to. Number one is to worship him and fellowship with him, our own personal relationship with him. But number two, to bring that gospel message, to encourage believers, but also to encourage other people to come to know Jesus. Without that initial beginning of a relationship with somebody, unfortunately, they spend eternity. There's many people that spend eternity or will spend eternity away from God. And wherever God has put you, you may be one of or the only ambassador for Christ that some of the people that you're around will ever hear. So how we live, how we go through things, how we, our character, that's, basically how we live, how we can even explain to somebody what God's done in our own lives is really important. But in order for that to be important, it has to be a focus. And for Paul, through this whole thing, he's trying to say here, he mentions the furtherance of the gospel. He says, while all of these things are happening, I'm not focusing on all the negative. I'm not focusing on the fact that I'm in prison. I'm not focusing on how rough it is. I'm not focusing on on what people may be saying about me. I'm focused again on the fact, and I can rejoice in the fact, that with all these things that are happening around me, I can tell you right now that I am successful in the eyes of the Lord, because as I look around, the gospel is being preached. And I want to challenge you with that today. Friend, when you look at your own life, in the decisions you make, are they decisions that would glorify God? That in the eyes of non-believers, in the eyes of maybe some of the people you go to church with, people that call themselves Christians, are you making decisions that God will look down on you or look at your life and say, you know what? I am so proud of you, son. I'm so proud of you, daughter, because your mindset is all geared around seeing the furtherance of the message that I chose to hang on a cross for and to die so that others would be able to be set free. And let's face it, friend, sometimes we go through tough situations, not nearly as tough as what Jesus went through. But there's times where God may allow situations in your life to happen that may cause some suffering with us. But if we handle these things properly, with our eyes upon the goal that God has for us in our life, and that is to be an ambassador for Jesus, to be somebody that is an ambassador for bringing the gospel to others, when we live in such a way that is a very important, one of the most important things in our personal life, to see the furtherance of that message, then what happens is you end up having an effect on so many people, and you will see lives transformed. As Paul wrote many of these letters, I don't think he understood the full magnitude of how his life and how him pouring out his life and writing these letters, I don't think he understood fully how much these letters that we write now that are encompassed in what we call the Bible today, how much they would have an effect on millions of people. And it all started with just him having the mindset that he had. So as I challenge you today, make the furtherance of the gospel an important part of your life. And when that is your focus is Jesus and the plan that he has for us, then you're going to see some amazing breakthroughs. You're going to have some tough things happen to you, but you're going to see God do amazing things in your life just like Paul saw, how I've seen, and how many others around that have made the commitment to follow Jesus have seen and are seeing even today, and will see in the future. Well, I hope you got something out of that today. If you did, I want to encourage you to subscribe to our channel if you're not already a subscriber. And please, if you're getting benefit from this content, please like it and share it with as many people as you think that it will help. Also, if you desire to help Daily Renewal financially, please see the links below. Well, I really enjoyed our session of Daily Renewal today, but until next time, God bless you and have a great day.